Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this rather important session in the digital week of the Research Festival. And no wonder, the topic is on digital research enterprise, exploiting innovations to generate impact. I mean, looking at the title itself, we could really appreciate the significance of the session from its title. If any one of the attendees is as old as I am, knowing the sector, the HE sector for the last 30 or 35 years, you would know for sure that impact some 30 odd years back was measured completely differently. The main thing about scientific innovations at the time was really its scientific rigor, that is originality, significance and the rigor of the science behind it. But only 20 years back, people have started realizing that in order for these scientific innovations to create impact as to how it makes an influence on the world as such, how is it that these scientific innovations can be taken to services, to applications, to products, in order to respond to societal needs, solve tough problems that communities and societies are facing. Hence, measuring impact has become completely different. It has taken completely different shape. So the key question is, what is that we should do in order to take scientific innovations to market or closer to market, put them in the form of services and products that benefit industry, the business sector, and society at large. The impact could be local, it could be regional, it could be national, but it could have potentially an international scale as well. Right, so I'm very pleased to be joined by two academic researchers who've made an impact not just on advancing the science, the digital science in their respective fields of interest, of expertise, but they've managed also to make an impact on the business sector through their SME spin-outs. I'm first very pleased to be joined by Dr. Alex Reip. Alex is an alumnus of Brunel, having completed his PhD at Brunel in 2015. Now, during his PhD, he joined the newly formed, at that time, Oxford nanoSystems, which is a nanotechnology company looking to improve energy efficiency in some of the world's most energy-intensive industries. Having run the company for over 5 years, he then stepped down as CEO to take up the CTO role in 2020. This has enabled him to focus on other projects as well. He is currently the Brunel's Royal Society Entrepreneur in Residence and spends part of his time advising several spin-outs and startup businesses on their technology, investment and growth strategies. Alex, very happy to have you.
Thank you very much. It's it's absolutely a pleasure to be here today. So it's being here. It's great to be here and sort of to give my sort of story on how I've done this over the last almost 10 years, and really give some of my journey and how Brunel has sort of helped shape Oxford nanoSystems as it is and to how we've got to where we are. So as always, a company starts with an idea. Now, our idea came from an academic at Oxford University, Professor Peter Dobson. At the time, he was the National Advisor on Nanotechnology to all of the UK research councils. And this was when, 2012 was when nano was the big word. Nanotechnology was the real sort of up and coming field. And he came up with an idea to be able to see whether you could use low-cost nano coatings to improve heat transfer. He, as well as a couple of other entrepreneurs around Oxford, took this idea to the Side Business School, to a group of MBA students, who then developed a business plan to focus on sustainability. As you know, one of the things we're trying to do is to make life and reduce CO2 emissions and make things better. And the idea they came up with and the plan they worked on is to develop this technology into a coating that could improve domestic boilers. As you know, there's almost everyone's house in the UK especially has domestic boilers, and they're not the most efficient things. And so what we're looking to do is try and develop something that could make these things more efficient, smaller, generate less CO2, and really give us sort of a big sustainable impact. Through writing this, they actually managed to raise a seed fund from an angel investor, which, when we haven't actually done at this point any research, this is purely an idea from someone's head, is quite extraordinary. And that's when sort of I got involved, when having met Peter at a lot of industrial conferences as during my PhD, I sort of enjoyed the more industrial side of the conferences more than the more academic side. He asked if I'd be interested in coming and sort of joining Oxford Nanosystems as CTO, and really sort of try and actually develop this technology. At that point in time, I was finishing my PhD, I was writing up. Because of this, my write-up took a lot longer than it should have done, but it's the wonders of joining a startup. And really, you know, what we were looking to do is to really, you know, develop this technology and get it into the market as soon as possible. So the company was probably then founded in 2012. That's when sort of the money arrived in. And one of the things, you know, very early on, I was told you can go and look this up. There are huge amounts of statistics behind the failure rate for these sort of deep tech companies. So very sort of disruptive technology, nanotechnology, sort of one area, artificial intelligence, there's another, sort of cryptocurrency, all of these kind of areas where the chance of your business going bust after sort of 2-3 years is very high. I think sort of 90%-ish. And so at that point in time, it was like, you know, well, finishing my PhD, let's give it a go. And so I joined ONS. There was 2 of us in the company at the time, me as CTO, and then the CEO, who's one of the MBA students who sort of kept the company running. And really, we had to keep a very low burn rate, which means, you know, you've got to make sure you're not spending large amounts of money and, you know, huge amounts of time trying to develop. You need to do this very, very quick and as efficiently as possible. And so we had a very small team. We were sort of 2 people we started. We fluctuated between 3 people and 2 people for the first few years of the company, really looking to develop our technology. At that point, we based ourselves at the Harwell campus due to we won a grant from the European Space Agency to try and see if we can use space technology in our commercial application. And the access that we got from there was to sort of really state-of-the-art labs, state-of-the-art equipment, the kind of things that if you were, you know, starting up, you need, but you'd never really be able to get access to, at the sort of the shoestring budget which startups are run. And so because of that, we were really able to develop our process much longer and for a much longer time as we should have done with the kind of investment we had to begin with. So one of the areas that I was brought in to do, of course, is to actually develop the coating technology. And one of the great things about being part of a startup is your job changes from day to day. So you're never going to be focused just on the technology. You know, I've designed the website, you're sort of talking to customers, you're you know, dealing with the finance side of things, developing budgets. There's no day is the same, which for me was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed doing you know, just any kind of job that you can possibly do to keep the company going and make sure you make an impact. And so one of the things, you know, well, one of the things we had to do is actually develop the technology. There's only a certain time a company can survive if all you're doing is designing a website. Is to develop the technology using sort of 4 main aspects. And what these were was make it cost effective. That's one of the things you don't want, is to make a technology that's, you know, may work great, but could be ridiculously high cost, especially when the kind of industries that we were looking at, domestic boilers is a great example, are you know, very cheap and you know, really cost driven, and you really don't want something to be expensive. One of the things, you know, you find when you talk to people in this industry, in any kind of heat transfer industries, is, well, you know, we can do exactly what you can do if we make the thing a bit bigger. And so you need to make it cost effective in that regard, and make it so that actually the performance you get is good. Secondly, make it easy to scale up, because of course the amount of units you'll be coating is huge. You know, making a small sample for a test is one thing, but can you then scale that process to coat, you know, what could be millions of these units a year? Thirdly, make it environmentally friendly. So the last thing you want, again, is to, yes, we can make a great coating, but we have huge amounts of waste that comes off with it. And then finally, actually, the important bit is demonstrate a very high heat transfer improvement. And that's sort of where, this is sort of the whole crux of the technology, was to make sure we could do this. And so after a year and a half, 2 years, developed our first coating. This is sort of what it looked like. It creates sort of nanopores for sort of heat. Well, it increases the surface area and creates nanopores for sort of large area bubble nucleation. And so, having developed this over the years, what we're able to do is we're able to tick off that, yes, we can make it cost effective. All of the chemicals we used for this to develop this deposition technique were very low cost. It is easy to scale up. We can take these things and scale it to coat not only heat exchangers of very large size, but also very high quantity. It's environmentally friendly, going and talking to environmental consultants, making sure that the materials we're using, not only you can get easily, they don't have any bad effect, but you can also dispose of quickly. And the only one we really had left to do is actually demonstrate a high heat transfer improvement. And that's one of the things that, at that point, my background is, as Abdul mentioned, is in materials. So that was something that I needed to look at. And so I did a lot of investigating into actually sort of seeing what can we, where can we go, what can we do for testing, again, trying to make this as cheap as possible. And having read through the academic literature, it was really interesting to see that actually I was heading back to Brunel, as Brunel has an absolutely fantastic thermal engineering department. And through one of the colleagues that I, from my PhD, introduced me to Professor Karianis, who had a facility that was perfect for what we needed. It had sort of testing facilities of all of the different types of heat transfer we could use. And then as time went on, when we started working with him, more in applications that we could actually test full systems. So, it was fantastic. So we went and had long discussions at the university and with Tassos, and really what he sort of came to us is actually, one of the things you might want to do is sort of slightly change your focus. So really domestic boilers is an area where, you might be able to see some kind of heat transfer improvement, but where you really want to focus is where you see sort of evaporation and proper evaporative heat transfer, so air conditioning and refrigeration, which is sort of become where we are now focusing. And so the first test that we did showed really, really great promise. It kept our investors happy. It allowed us some sort of interest from some of the customers that we were trying to approach. Because of course, at this point in time, we're a tiny company, I think we were actually 2 people then. You go up to these very, very large manufacturers. Who really wants to speak to a tiny company that have a piece of technology and, a sort of, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, but really you don't know what it can do. So what we were able to prove with this first test is, we were able to improve the heat transfer coefficient by 70%, which is, it's interesting. It gets people's attention. But for a first test, can we do better? So one of the things that he brought up after we got these results is, can we actually grow this from a nano coating to something larger? And so that was then us running back to the lab and trying again and seeing what we could do to scale the technology and develop the chemistry to be able to coat things at a much larger scale. And that's when we really sort of came up in 2014, 2015, the coating that we are now using. So we call it nanoflux. And what it is, it's a dendritic coating. We can change the shape of it, we can grow it, and it creates large amounts of nucleation on the surface. And we had this tested again in Tassos's labs to be able to show massive improvements. Depending on the heat flux we're using, sometimes 500%. So it was a really serious result that we could go to these sort of large manufacturers, these sort of large system OEMs, the likes that you would have heard, sort of Toshibas and things, and go, we have something. Would you like to test it? And that really sort of started our collaboration with the university. So we got a great foothold into the space to understand what we're doing and to really then allow us to push things further, and all down to really the sort of the collaboration and the growing collaboration that we had. And so over the next few years, we worked together with Tassos's group. He tested our coating on a number of different other sort of test rigs that he had. We worked on grant applications to actually build more industrially relevant systems as well. And also then went into another area which we were very interested in, which was sort of microchannel cooling for electronics and data centers, to really be able to take an area that uses, especially as it's in the news at the moment, you know, these really hot areas where you see sort of really high energy use, and see whether we could actually help and make it better. And so, you know, while our collaboration was happening, we were able to take these results and go to external companies. We were able to raise investment. So in 2015, that was sort of when I took over as CEO of Oxford Nanosystems, and really were able to push forward. So the results that we got from this, we were able to go and raise more funding. Over the course of the lifetime of the company, we raised about sort of 5.5 million through grants, through equity, through sort of convertible loans as well, to be able to develop the technology and really sort of grow the company into where we are at the moment. So I sort of mentioned, you know, even in the last 3 years, we've grown from 3 people when we raised our investment to now 16. And it's all due to, you know, the ability to have these things tested at the university. We've also been able to have a much more of a global focus. So, you know, Brunel and the engineering department is very well known globally. And so when we go to companies and say, you know, these are the results we've got, they're fully independent, which, as you can imagine, you know, is what you want to see from people. You know, if we go saying, oh, these are our results to begin with, you know, okay, we need to test it. Whereas if we can go and take other people's results and say, this is what we've been doing, this has been tested by, you know, this world-leading group, it gets people's attention. And so we've been able to talk to some very high-profile global companies, and have been, you know, over the last couple of years, have been working on projects and be testing with these, all because of the results that we managed to get early on. And now finally, we are at a point where we're in the process of scaling our technology into the market. So we've designed our own sort of large-scale testing facilities at the moment. That's sort of where we're going, and really begin commercializing the technology. As Abdul mentioned, I stepped back last year as the company was sort of in its right position for the next phase of growth. And so now I'm sort of back focusing on the technology, but then allowing me to increase my sort of knowledge and abilities by helping other startups go through this process as I've done it, learn how to do things and how not to do things as I've done, while we're then sort of pushing this into the market. So our focus has also expanded. So originally from the sort of domestic boilers, we're now looking at anything from heat pumps, large-scale retail refrigeration, air conditioning, and data center cooling. And yeah, and really sort of take a large interest in how can we make, you know, how can we reduce energy consumption in the UK, globally, and what can we do to reduce CO2 emissions? So this is really our mission going forward. And so to really finish and show this, want to sort of show the benefits of what we found of having sort of a university collaborator that we can work closely with. One of the reasons I decided to do this entrepreneur in residence and worked with the Royal Society to get this was I wanted to give back something to the university as well, from not only from my PhD, but also the work that we've had and the results that we've got over the course of the years has really sort of helped us so much. I wanted to give something back, which is why, yes, I'm now sort of helping the university do this as another step. So the main benefits for working with the university and for doing this is, you know, the high levels of expertise in areas where, you know, you might not be really part of. You can go and speak to these groups that have been doing this for, you know, much longer than you may well have been doing, and to be able to get their expertise to help figure out what the next step is. Where are you on your TRL, your technology readiness level, and where do you want to get to, and how can the university help? As I've already mentioned, you know, you're trying to keep things when you're working on a startup at as low cost as possible. And so, you know, working with a group rather than having to bring on your own team can be very cost effective. And, you know, Brunel especially have got sort of an innovation voucher scheme where SMEs can work with the university and get some of their costs covered, which is, you know, really sort of helpful. I've already mentioned the, you know, independent results that you can get to really help sort of push you into other companies and help show that your technology is someone else thinks it's worthwhile, not just you. And then finally, with the scale of the collaborations that that universities have working with companies large and small, you might well potentially meet your a future customer or a future partner to be able to develop your technology further. And so for us and for me, it's been working back with Brunel from a different from the business standpoint and from the technology standpoint has been incredibly sort of worthwhile, and has really sort of helped us push forward and really sort of hit boundaries which, when we first started, we didn't think we'd do. We spent ages trying to figure out how to do this, and going and finding a university collaboration like this has really helped. And yeah, and that's it. So thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. I hope I didn't go too fast. But yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Alex. I think the questions will be deferred till the end, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, once we've heard the other success story from David, then perhaps the questions could be addressed to both of you at the same time. We learn from both your experiences and ask questions accordingly. Right, I'm really very pleased also to be joined by another academic entrepreneur, successful academic entrepreneur, is our very David Bell. David is a reader at the Department of Computer Science at Brunel, where his teaching and research interests lie in the area of software service design. I presume that's software as a service, SaaS, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me, David. As well as cybersecurity and also modeling and simulation. It's one of his key strengths, really. I know that for a fact myself. During the first part of his career, David worked for over 10 years within the investment banking industry, going from developer to technology director for emerging markets and fixed income derivatives. Now, very recently, David's been leading the CV19 simulation initiatives, working with the NHS and local government collaborators. He's the CTO at Heco Analytics Limited, which is a Brunel startup that has developed a cloud-based health economics evidence platform. David, very pleased to have you on board. Could you tell us about your own success story in innovation entrepreneurship?
Yes, thank you, Abdul. I'll share my screen now and get started. Yeah, so I didn't really know what to cover today, but I've sort of focused my talk very much around reflections and insights from the last couple of years working on Heco Analytics. But I think I'd also say I agree with a lot of what Alex was talking about as well. I think there's some similarities, even though the sort of companies are very different. So I'll start just giving a little bit of context. So Heco Analytics came out of an Innovate UK funded project that we got here at Brunel University about 5 years ago. And this was very much aimed at looking at technologies, health technologies, looking at certain diseases. The one that we were looking at was sepsis, and we worked with a number of companies who were doing things like robot labs and things like this. But the whole aim of the grant was to model evidence and start to understand where you can take a digital service or a product and fit it into the health system to get the required benefit from that. Over the course of the grant, we decided to look at commercialization opportunities when Heco Analytics became came from this sort of TPOC research background. So what I wanted to cover, I'll start off a little bit about commercializing research, and this is just some comments about sort of starting this journey. Then I'm going to sort of give a short run through of Heco Analytics, and then also just some wrap-up comments on sort of progress so far and things like that. So I think, remember, I'm a computer scientist, so I'm focusing very much on sort of digital interventions, and Heco Analytics is a digital service around medical evidence. But the key thing here is, and I think as academics, it's research is very easy to develop an idea. It's very constrained in a way that we can decide how we want to undertake a piece of research, but moving an idea from the idea itself to a commercial offering is quite a windy road, hence some of these sort of bendy arrows and things like that. And I think my startup is really to start that road. You have to really want to, you really have that interest and motivation, because it isn't typically, and I think Alex made a good point as well, where you start at isn't necessarily where you end up at, because you go through sort of pivots or jumps in the road. And then it's also understanding what that commercial offering is. The commercial offering isn't just, I've got some excellent research, let's commercialize it and off we go. It's thinking that little bit more. What is your first minimum viable product or your first offering? What does your first customer look like? How are you going to sell to that first customer? And probably the more important one is, how are you going to evolve over time? And this isn't the traditional, after 1 year we want this, 2 years we have this. It's really, how are you going to learn as you develop and adapt as you go through this sort of development process. I'll talk a little bit about Heco Analytics now. I'll just summarize it as it says in the slide. It's a cloud-based evidence tool. So it's a database that allows companies to gather medical data, and that data can come from several sources. It can come from more traditional health economics, like literature reviews, and we do some work with sort of semantic modeling and bringing that into our cloud database. But it can also come into more computational things as well, so simulations, machine learning, and it's really about building this evidence base and growing that evidence base so it can feed health economic models and make a good business case. So I think this one is a little bit salesy, but it's, you know, why is it valuable? It's really about helping companies sort of develop a product or service for the right market at the right price, and where do you focus that particular type of investment? We focus very much on health, and health, you know, is really understanding where you can get that benefit and at what time is quite important, and that's what some of the work here looks at. And how is it used? It's used very much across various different stages, but quite often it's used at the concept stage. So our approach doesn't need lots of trial data. We can even start to do some of the economic modeling and data gathering to understand where that trial should take place, or what that trial should really look at. And this is quite important, because often from this stage you can change the trial, make sure you gather additional evidence and things like this. So it's really a digital service that provides this process to really understand how digital technologies can improve healthcare, and that's the sort of space we're in with Heco Analytics. This is just another picture summarizing a little bit more. So this gathering of data, it's a graph style database, but it can start from sort of narrative data capture. We use something called pick tags for annotating narrative, right through to more computational data and growing these types of graph databases. We've added some additional tools like HeConnect, which is a sort of mobile and web service interface, so that you can supplement the data with things like, maybe a mobile device that's used within a trial or something like that. And then it comes into our platform for use in doing some of the modeling and making that sort of business case. So it's a development process, and it's about growing this health economic evidence base. And that's really the focus of what Heco Analytics is about. What underpins a lot of this is measuring things. So it's about getting evidence and robust evidence from literature or from data, computation trials, etc. But what underpins this is often a more traditional sort of PICO type analysis. So really understanding what is the population you're going to impact. In a lot of health plays, people often look at very large populations, maybe everybody with diabetes in a particular country, but really starting to understand more nuanced populations where interventions can be quicker, more easily evidenced, is often quite a good approach that some of our modeling identifies quite early. So it's understanding the population, understanding the intervention itself, so the product or service and what it can do, understanding the comparator or the competitor, what is it replacing? Is it a device that's replacing a lab system? Is it a more manual system in hospital or something like that? And what is the outcome? And a lot of our work has looked at a whole range of devices, from things that are testing devices, from lateral flow tests, which are quite popular at the moment, right through to AI type of digital services, and a whole range. And it's really positioning these types of things with this sort of PICO underpinning. So I think, let me just double check where we're at. So the next thing is, we've got this product, and we've got this analysis tool, and really what we're looking at is looking at sort of how a product can mature, how can it enter the market at different times, how can you support it with grants at different points, what are the evidence requirements, do you use synthetic or real data at different stages in that life cycle, and what sort of models can we use? So this is right from the algorithms themselves, the health pathways, but also the economics. What are these very early stage, or are these after one or more trials? So this is where the sort of positioning of Heco Analytics is, being able to support companies across the maturity cycle at different times in their evolution, and really being able to model how they invest and position that sort of next stage. So that's basically the concept of Heco Analytics. The next stage is then getting started. It's a technology play, and we decided that we would grow this embryonically, so not through direct investment, through customer sales. So our, like all good IT plays, we started off with a website, but that's only that sort of starting point. And then before I go into this, I'll just talk a little bit. We had the starting point. We wanted to grow this through sort of in a way that was developed by customers as they came on board. We have started relatively slowly with sort of one or two companies initially who wanted to use it, but then it started to ramp up. So in the last 6 months, we've worked with 10 new customers, and and it looks like it's going to ramp up again in the sort of second half of this year. So you know, it's a startup that's profitable, which, you know, that's also quite a big thing. In my previous career, when I worked in investment banking, I did a lot of due diligence on startups, and getting to that first step, a customer and profitability, you know, and no mean feat. So it was quite nice to reach that stage. So that's Heco Analytics. It's this digital platform for supporting companies, or specifically digital companies, entering the health market. But I thought for the last bit, I'd just reflect a little bit about, you know, what, from an academic's perspective, you know, what have I learned over the last sort of 2 or 3 years as we've sort of grown this startup. I think I've got a nice picture of the team. I support Watford, but the point here is the team. It's quite important. I think as an academic, I knew that I didn't want to be the CEO of this company. I'd also worked with a lot of startups in my previous career, and I think I had a strong feeling that the CEO has to be very closely linked to the customers and have a very strong track record in the industry that you want to go into. So we were, with the help of Teresa and the RSDO, they supported us building this collaboration and this team that's worked pretty well. So I've always taken the sort of technology CTO type role, primarily because that's my interest, and you know, I didn't want to do that piece. But I think building that team is quite important, and understanding what you want to do as an academic, not what you think you want to do, what you really want to do, and the pieces that you want other people to support your skill set in is quite important if you're growing your research. You know, it's different if you're joining another team, but I'd say that was quite important. I think the other piece is customers are all on slightly different journeys, and the thing I've learned over the last 2 or 3 years is you know, we do a lot of learning when we do our research using more traditional methods, but the amount of learning that you do when you're working with customers is quite substantial. So it's being prepared to learn, to pivot the product, to adapt. Over the course of the last two or 3 years, we've got closer relationships with NICE. We use the NICE meta framework at the early points in our offering. But I think the key point here is really understanding that it isn't just I have a product and I'm rolling it out. It's adapting that product as you get new customers, you get new collaborations, and they're on different journeys. The other point is, you know, we realized that my initial research project was looking at early stage companies, but companies are at different stages. They've got different product or service offerings. And then what Heco Analytics has to provide has to adapt to that as well. So dealing with everyone from just at a very early concept stage through to people who've sold internationally and have done multiple trials, and they're looking how to enter a new market, and covering that and learning how to embed that within our Heco Analytics platform was quite important. And it's just emphasizing this learning and pivoting. So as you learn from deploying your technology to customers, you are learning to adapt. Is this the area that I specifically want to be in, or do I want to switch to something that better fits these companies? Technology is classic in this area because it is easier to adapt platforms. You know, large scale engineering, you don't necessarily have some of these platforms, but even in Alex's talk, you could see moving into slightly different industries and pivoting, you get that type of thing. I think that was my last slides. So I've gone through the start, what Heco Analytics is and some of the learning, but I'm quite happy to answer lots of questions if people have got any more pragmatic or practical things they want to ask now.
Perfect. Well, thanks to both speakers. Really fascinating way of sharing your experiences, your success stories. Very, very impressive. Now we've got already questions posed in the chat box here, many of which are addressed to both of you guys. So perhaps if we follow the same sequence as it appeared in the presentation, starting with Alex providing the first response and then David, that would be good. So a question by Teresa. I think it's a twofold question. She's asking, in your opinion, what is it that government could do to improve the innovation environment for spin-outs? That's on one side. On the other side, what is it that universities could do differently to support the spin-outs that we create? So twofold question. Starting with Alex.
Sure, it's a really good question. I think one of the things that the government could do is basically give more research funding to mid-TRL level programs. So one of the main issues you've got is you can get a large amount of funding from the likes of the research councils for when you're doing your academic research. And then there's the likes of Innovate UK when you want sort of grant funding when you become a company. But there's very little in that space from going from, you know, you've tested it in a lab and then you need to go out and you know, do you want to do a business there? So I think that the government can do more to try and basically, yeah, give more funding for that type of area, so that, you know, you can do more market research, you can do more you know, sort of customer discussions and really then make the decision whether you want to sort of to spin it out, I think. And what should universities be doing better, if I want to cover the whole thing in one go? I think make sure that the academics and the staff are in some ways, you know, not compensated, but can you know, get something for doing this kind of commercial work. As there, you know, I know some universities they're focused much more on the research side, and so if an academic wants to go off and do something more down the commercial path, then, you know, they're not penalised, but they may not get ahead as fast as they want. So I think to try and make sure that academics are free, but are able to do that at the same amount of time as also developing a sort of their research going forward.
Great, thanks very much, Alex. David?
Yeah, so government is a different one, I suppose. Money is always a good one to talk about. I think from a technology perspective, and keeping away from just the pure funding play, I think to scale up, I think staffing is quite a key issue for digital technology companies, and I think what would really help is something like a KTP on steroids, where you can sort of bring technology people in, or a team of maybe graduates, not necessarily PhD students, and staff within a university environment. So it's that stage where you want to sort of grow it in a fairly early stage, but get the skill sets in and get them in quickly, you know, and that type of thing. I think the government could help with that. And I think especially in this time of post-COVID, where employment might be quite variable, I would have thought that would be a great one to do. But in terms of universities, I think it's more about the culture of these types of things. So I think it's how do you build a culture where you've got many companies working together, competing, learning from each other, swapping staff, having staff who move around, and getting that level of dynamism that you get in US universities. But I think in the UK, very few have really managed to do that. And I think, again, remember, I'm quite technology, you know, IT focused. So it's that sort of area which I think it sort of misses a little bit more.
Great. Thanks very much. Another question from Michael. Not sure this has been already addressed in Teresa's question, but I'll fire it off anyway, just in case I'm not too clear about the context here. So Michael is saying, based on your experience, and again to both speakers, what guidance would you offer on navigating the government support processes from Innovate UK?
Yeah, from sort of my background taking it, I mean, Innovate UK is, and especially more recently with the new portal they've created, it's a much easier way of trying to get sort of government funding for technology than some of the areas. Like if you try and look through the EU funding website to try and find a call, it's absolutely awful to try and figure out what one to go for. Whereas Innovate, they've made it very easy to do. So I think yeah, I think go for that side of things. It's a much easier way of doing it. To then, you know, putting in the grant application, you get very good feedback coming back, which also helps to see where you may need to change things and to resubmit. So no, I think the support process that Innovate do are very good. I don't know really what else to say about that unless there's any sort of more information we could get.
I think the only thing I would add to that a little bit, and I'll assume this is asked from an academic towards Innovate UK. It's, remember, Innovate UK is about supporting innovation. So make sure if you do write grants, you're working with a company, and the company innovation is the central theme, and have a very clear idea of what impact bringing your research to that company will have. Because I know from my early attempts at Innovate UK, you start to write them like a research project, and they're not, you know, and they won't get funded. So it's that sort of wording and making sure that it does have that sort of industry perspective, and research is allowing industry to do things that they wouldn't naturally be able to do on their own. So I think it's keeping that focus, I would say.
Excellent. Okay, the last one in the chat box, we don't have to restrict ourselves just to questions in the chat box. It's addressed to David, this one. He's asking, what advice would you give to academics, David, who want to go down the spin-out route?
Yeah, this is quite a difficult one to answer. I'm always happy to discuss it in more detail if people want to contact me, and I'm sure Alex will have a different view as well. Everyone has a different requirement from sort of starting an organization or taking their research to the next level. But I think it's really making sure that whatever you want to do in terms of the spin out, it is your passion. You know, you really want to take that to the next level. You know, the thing that you're rolling out or going with or adding to has to be a passion. It's not like just purely a bit of something I can do as well as the academic job. You have to really link the two together. So I think in terms of academics doing spin-outs, I think it's making sure that it's your passion and probably quite closely linked to your research, you know, because if you want to keep the two to get together. So I think they're the two things that I would say about this. But this is a very difficult one to answer because everybody has a different sort of personal requirement to get out of this. I think for me, it was also, I was interested in doing that. I'd done some due diligence with startups. You know, I'd worked for big banking companies. I've worked in academia, and I thought it would be, after the grant, I thought it would be quite interesting to try and do this as well as a intellectual exercise, but everyone will have a different view of this, I would sort of guess.
I think also sort of figuring out what you want to do with the company. Do you want to, as sort of David mentioned in his presentation, do you want sort of to really take it and run with it as CEO? Do you want to sort of to sit back in more of the CTO role and advise, or do you want even going more just literally just be an advisor and try and see if you can find the team to take it forward? So it really depends on, you know, on what you want to do and how you want to go for it.
So as a follow-up perhaps to you guys, to this question, last question by Hitesh, how do you assess the advantages of going down the spin-out route compared, for instance, to another commercialization route which people normally take, which is licensing? Is it case dependent that people would choose whether to go down spin-outs versus licensing, or is it there are other factors to take into consideration to make the choice?
I think I'm happy to take that first. Yeah, I think I think it really is sort of case dependent. It really depends on the idea. Some ideas and some research you can sort of see if you're doing a small incremental improvement or change, then licensing the technology to a big player to really sort of take the need off your hands would be a better way to go. If it's something that you see could be really disruptive in an industry or could really sort of change something, and you can really sort of see how you would make the market and what you would do, I think then maybe the spin out's the right route. But yeah, I think really case dependent.
I think from my perspective, again, technology startups, licensing is generally not a good route to go because it's very hard to license. I think it's not a definite no-go, but it's a little bit more difficult because I think it's really doing the sort of spin out approach. And I think what my journey in doing Heco Analytics, the sort of spin out assessment, that sort of Heco analysis for healthcare assessments are quite good. So if you think you've got a concept, starting to understand, all the elements of that sort of Heco model that's been around a couple of decades now, is a good starting point, because the thing is, as academics, it's understanding. We all think we've got great ideas, but it's whether you can turn that great idea into the first sell with an actual customer, and after the first sell, is it worth taking further? So understanding how you compare to competitors, comparator type products or services. So I think I'm very much in favor of spin out versus licensing for sort of digital technologies, but really taking a reflective piece first and getting other friends you've got or colleagues to come and discuss things as well early on. I think that's not to be underestimated, sort of bringing your ideas together and running them by people who've either done it before or have got some knowledge in that area is also very, very useful.
Would it be fair to say, David, that providing you got the resources, and what I mean by resources could be human resources, could be infrastructural, could be time, as well as other aspects as well. If you've got the resources, then perhaps think spin out. But if not, and you rather sell a license, get other people to deal with it, then perhaps licensing would be the best approach to take. Would that be fair to say?
It's not. The difference now is, though, that a lot of these functions like HR, payroll, and all these types of things, you can buy them as services. To be a micro company now is very easy, not have this staffing. So I think it's more. I think licensing is more about probably things you're going to, you're licensing to someone who's got a capacity that you're not likely to build. If you think you can build it internally, and if HR and payroll is a problem, you can go to these online suppliers and they'll provide that very quickly. That won't be the problem. I think with licensing, it's more the capacity, more to manufacture. Maybe I would sort of see it, but I don't have the engineering background of Alex, but that's my gut feel on that.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges and the risks that come with spin-outs, because we academics, as you know, are quite good in rushing to put our innovation in the public domain through papers. The first thing we want it to go to the public domain as quickly as possible and see how it compares with the state of the art in the field. We always like to push boundaries in our respective fields of interest. But sometimes these innovations do have a commercial value. They do have a value proposition. It's quite a valuable one too. But we never think this way. We just want to boast about the technical significance and the originality of the innovation. Hence, we think about journals. But that's one aspect. Another aspect is that we tend to be put off by the challenges and the risks that come with the commercialization as a process. And to me, there are two types of risks here. There is the risk that is associated with launching the spin out off ground in a rather competitive field, very competitive market. But then the other risk is that once it's there in the market, how do you sustain it and make it sustainable on the long term? These are two completely different set of risks to me. So in your experiences, starting again with Alex, what have been the key challenges perhaps for you to see your company getting launched off ground as the first stage, and then once to put it in the market, what were the challenges that you were faced up with in order to grow it? You talk about 16 personnel as opposed to 3 in a rather 3 years time scale, which is fantastic. So how do you manage to survive in a very, very competitive field?
I think it's really sort of knowing, as David's mentioned, sort of really being in with your technology and really enjoying it and be passionate about it is sort of a big sort of push, because that'll really sort of help you drive it and do things with it. Starting off, of course, funding is always the main issue when you're starting these things. So a lot of startup time is always to try and find where the funding is coming from. People always say you need an 18-month runway that you try and look for, but when you're starting and you're running your startup, if you've like us, if you've got technology development to do before the customer, or you need lots of testing with the customer, then it'll be you may well only have sort of a month-to-month supply of cash, and sort of every little thing you can get then really sort of will help sustain you for that extra month. That's sort of where we were at a point where we didn't know if next month that might be it for us. So you've really got to have the ability to sort of push through that and not give up. That's sort of a big thing. And then making sure that the technology you want to put out, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's a big issue when it comes to people that really like technology and really work. Sort of, for me, it was getting, having the scientist in me sort of slightly step aside and go, okay, yeah, well, the technology works, but we can make it better. It's like, well, that's fine, but at the moment that doesn't really matter. Getting something out in the market, being able to prove it, having your first customer experience, either for testing or just for some kind of joint development agreement for a contract, something like that. That's the most important thing. And so really trying to get your head out that it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get out your first product. You can always develop and change and play with it later. But yeah, getting out and into the market should be the #1 focus. And then on the growth, I think it's really interesting how things change then when you actually do hit that point for us. So the amount of extra time spent dealing with HR issues and hiring and recruitment takes a long time, and so to go from sort of 3 to 16, I spent most of the year really sort of hiring people and getting to that point and bringing people on, and then then needing to find the space, and you then find yourself more of a facilities and HR manager than you are sort of a CTO, and so trying to do that, whereas at the same time, still pushing the technology, dealing with the customers. So it's a lot of risk involved, even when you sort of get to the point where you are, where you've sort of got your team assembled and ready. I think so. Yeah, that's the way we found it to get to the point where we are at the moment.
David?
Yeah, I think I'll make some sort of quite similar comments. I think at that initial phase, it is having a really good or a really low burn rate as a technology company, because I remember over about 10 years ago, I worked for a startup doing some consulting, and they'd got VC funding of about $10 million. They'd hired 40 people very quickly. They had very nice offices, and And the thing is, you can see what happens slowly over time. They spend all their money and then they don't exist. So, which is the essence of your question. So keeping the burn rate low is key. And I think whether it's starting up or it's continuing, again, these are my own views. But again, I think they're similar to Alex's. It's, you know, in technology, it is MVP, minimum viable products, but getting out to customers. So it is that getting the minimum, how to make that first sale with the customer is that big leap. Once you've got a customer, it's very easy to sell products. You know, if you're walking around and all you've got is a couple of papers and, you know, it's a lot harder as a technology company. So it's getting that customers, then growing that customer base is also important. I don't think I've got too many wise words to say about that because a lot of it is serendipity. I think if I look back over the last sort of year or two, you know, it's been in the game. You have to be out there to then be able to get those types of things. If I could encapsulate it, I don't think I can. I think it's one of those. So with a low burn rate, get out there and try to get as many customers as possible is probably a good one to do, but not too many. You have to grow it. I talked earlier in my talk about evolution. You have to evolve it, learning yourself as an organization, but also with your customers, and that learning allows you to grow that company.
Was CV19 good news to your business, David?
Pardon, Abdul?
Was CV19, COVID-19, was it good news to your business in terms of growth and sustainability? I mean, you talked about serendipity.
Yeah, I think it was, and I'll tell you why. It's not because of I was doing at the time. I did a year ago. I started doing less Heco Analytics stuff and focusing more on NHS work. But what came quite soon was really, I think, digital health technology. You know, because COVID forced new sort of products and services to be out there. Interestingly, most of the products or service companies we're looking at, and they all tend to be digital services, they're not COVID-19 companies. So I think it's more in the world of COVID, some of the digital technologies in healthcare have come forward quicker because there's a need. You know, you can't actually do the testing in hospital. You need to start to do things, you know, more point of care or looking at different indicators to triage or whatever.
Okay. Now that you've gone through the successful experience, David, and this question is from Hitesh, it's not from me, it's a follow-up. Is there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, that's probably a good one for both me and Alex, actually. So there are probably several. Again, it's a difficult one to sort of make any good recommendations on, because I think obviously with hindsight, I would have done all the successful things more and the unsuccessful things less. But unfortunately at the time, knowing the and also you learn from some of the unsuccessful things. So I think if anything, I would have been probably in that transition from the research project to the startup, be probably a little looser in what Heco Analytics was going to be. I think I was a little bit, the research is this domain, so just being a little more open at that transition. But I don't think I've got any real differences, because I think if I started again now, it would be a different journey again, because it's a different environment. So it is very hard to really pinpoint anything other than those things like passion, learning, be prepared to evolve, keep your run rate, your burn rate quite, manageable. Alex?
Yeah, I think you've sort of you hit the nail on the head there. You know, it's all about the journey, and so, you know, would I do anything differently? Well, yes, now, but because I've learned everything, I've learned the wrong ways of doing it. That's how I'm trying to help people not do those issues, you know, not do the wrong things. But yeah, it's yeah, I think you sort of covered it all, really, David.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the stages that follow innovations until you got the first release of a product ready to be sold, if you like, and commercialized. The stages you've got to go through from proof of concept all the way to product version 1. What are they in terms of market analysis, analyzing demand, needs, competition out there in the market, and so on? And is there any funding that is available to academics, translational funding, I think they call it, that would allow you to go through these stages until you produce the first version of a product? So what are they in your experience, Alex?
Blimey, that's a question. How much longer have we got? That could go. I could go talk about that for a long time. I think that's very open. I think, yeah. So after the proof of concept, especially more the academic way, after you sort of prove something in the lab, it's then carrying out an analysis to show that what you can do, you can actually do at scale. I think that sort of what, when we first started, that's what we needed to make sure. And I mean, I think it's different from sort of more the digital side of things, but for us, it's, yeah, making sure that the product you can do at sort of a cost that someone will pay for it, going out to the market and trying to talk to people, you know, making sure that, as you sort of suggested before, that you don't go talking too much about anything that someone could then steal. So make sure you've got some kind of IP protection in place if you think it's worthwhile. As you know, I've seen some ways where that's gone awfully badly. It was an event we went to where a group of academics gave a talk about, you know, how proud they were about this new system they've done, and it was for a competition. And the judges sort of went, "Oh, what IP have you got?" And they went, "Well, we don't yet." And they went, "Well, you've just gone and announced it in the public forum, so, you know, major problems." And I think that's, yeah. So once you've sort of got that under control, then it's yeah, trying to find the customers that will pay for it, I think is really the big step. Looking out there to see if there's any competition around, see if you can figure out how either your product's better or cheaper, or how you differentiate yourself from the competition. In certain areas, I know it's easier than others, especially when you're sort of on the cutting edge. It can be interesting. For customers in general, it depends on the market you go into as well. You might find that, you know, for example, when we went into the domestic boiler market, you know, there were a few big players in that we were speaking to, but the actual innovations that they were having, you know, it's technology that had been around for years, and it was safe, and people don't really want to change it. So it might take that. Actually, what takes the time is trying to convince your customer that what you bring to it could be better, or could help them. And then you know, if you're unlucky, you may then have to go through a very long testing cycle. So that's sort of what on the path that we're on at the moment is testing or having customers testing our product for long periods of time to make sure that nothing changes, it doesn't damage anything, especially when you're a small part of a big system like us. You know, making sure that nothing that you do could damage anything else, because then that's another kettle of fish in itself. And yeah, and that's then when you can sort of start moving forward and then deciding on how you can, you know, you've done the work to show, yes, it's cost effective, but then how do you scale something at that rate? So that's when, for us, it was bringing on a process engineer to actually, with the experience, to take what we've done and scale it to do a large, you know, a large quantity of units per year and prove that it can work. And to do that, I know, to your second part of your question, I think there is some translational funding out there. I know that a lot of the research councils are now looking into this to try and see what they can do to help do the sort of the market analysis, the competition analysis, the SWOT analysis, and all of this to help people see, actually, is it worth spinning out a company? I don't know what's out there at the moment, but just speaking to people in the research council, I have heard that there are pilot programs going on to see how it works. So I think this is going to become, you know, become more in future. But I'm not entirely sure what's out there at the moment.
Great, thanks, Alex. David?
Yeah, I think I would say I think Innovate UK play part of that role. So, for example, if you've got a piece of research you do want to commercialize and you haven't had too much interaction with a customer, that proof is actually getting out there with an Innovate grant and working with one or more customers who are on the grant. Could be that translational piece. Yeah, it is quite interesting, and I think that is quite a key stage. I think we were quite lucky in that the Innovate UK grant I got about 5 years ago was SBRI funded to work with a number of small companies who are similar, digital technology companies. So they didn't become our customers per se, because they used the technology as part of the grant, but the knowledge you got by working with them helped you make that next stage of transition. So I think the Innovate grant was quite useful for that piece, really starting to understand if what you've got has got legs. I think whether it's worth to make that jump. If I just had some pure research, it's a lot more difficult. I think there it is more difficult.
Of course. If you want to go down the private investment route, as opposed to using public funds to support that translational phase, what sort of case do you have put together to convince any prospective investor to invest in your innovation, as it were? Do you have to show them a working prototype? What does it take to convince a potential investor? In your experience, Alex, because you did mention about securing some sort of loans or investment funds up front to fund your.
Yes, so we've had, over the years, we've had sort of a few different angel investors. So it's what you need to show investment groups really depends on where they are on the spectrum. So for when you start off and you're sort of very early, then going for sort of the angel investor, so a high net worth individual who is looking to really help as an investment, to try and see if they can get some more money by putting it into an interesting idea that may do really well. For that kind of area, you will normally be showing a lot earlier progress. So it might be you've got a bit of customer traction, you've got a patent that's filed, and that you can show that the space is yours, and that the technology works, which is always a good one, and that might just be it. So it might be something very simple. If you then find that you actually need a larger amount, because it might be, you might find that to get to the next stage, you need to really sort of build a plant to do it. So you might need to do that before the customer comes along, which for some areas I've seen you need to. That's when you're looking at sort of the venture capital groups where, yes, you will need to show a lot more customer traction. You'll need to have your patents filed. You'll need to have the team. And a lot of investors, really, it's all about the team, especially early stage. That's more what they want to see, is that you've got a team that is focused, that's interested, that understands the idea, and that can sort of push it ahead. I think the other things is for the venture capital groups, they normally have funds that are open 5 to 7 years. So they'll want to see a return in that time. Either the company's grown to a stage where you can float the company, you can go and bring on a private equity group to do more. Whereas the angel investors sometimes also can be on there for a longer period of time, and so are more patient. But they'll need to still see things, that you're moving things forward, but it might be that they are are less focused on getting their money back in the short term. So it really depends on the group, I think. But to go with that, just quickly, I don't think it's either or, public funding or private funding. Even if you go for the Innovate UK route, you still need to have match funding to help do it. So for a lot of grants for startups and SMEs in general, Innovate, they'll pay 70% of the cost of the project. So you've still got to fund it, and of course it's paid in arrears quarterly. So you still have to have money in to fund it. And so applying and getting an Innovate grant can sometimes help leverage private funding, because you can go to people going, look, I've got this 500k from government, so if you give me $1 million, then at least that there's some of your money covered. And so I don't think it's a yeah, it's one or the other. I think doing them in tandem really can help with both.
Excellent, thanks, Alex. David, in your experience?
Yeah, I don't. My experience here is a little bit more on the other side. I've done some work with VC parts of banks, and there you're a bit later along in the scheme of things, because you're generally looking at a company that's already got quite a lot of customers, and you're looking at growth. But I think the points Alex made very much about it's basically the idea and the team. So is the idea good, and can the team that you've put together in this startup actually grow that idea? So the difference between later stage, which I know more about, and earlier stage is probably an earlier stage. If you're going to these angel networks, they'll know a lot more about the domain specifics about your, you may have other academics who are in that same area who are also looking and giving comments on your type of work. But I think the core thing is the idea itself. Does it stand up, and is that the team to grow it?
Excellent, very good answers. Thanks very much. Right, there was a burning question I really meant to ask Alex about from the right outset, but I didn't. Just to my understanding, how do you combine between nanotechnology and energy efficiency? Nanotechnology is a digital technology, energy efficiency not necessarily so. How did you put the two together?
Nanotechnology for us is it's more of the it's sort of the size of the technology we're using. So we put nano coatings down on surfaces to improve heat transfer. So we're putting nanometric layers down, or now micrometric layers, but Oxford Microsystems doesn't sound as good. So nanometric layers down on the surface, which then allows you to improve heat transfer. Improving heat transfer then means that you can make things more energy efficient and therefore reduce CO2 emissions. So it then builds up down the line. So yeah, it's nano more in the material side of things than it is on the digital.
Okay, so what are these components that you put together on a very small surface area then? They're not definitely integrated circuits and transistors, are they?
No, it's a metallic alloy that we put down that's sort of nanometric shaped and nanometric sort of sizes and modifications that you saw in the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Alex. Any other questions from the floor? You don't have to write it or type it up in the chat box, but you could just fire it off live here on voice that we haven't addressed that you really want to hear an answer to from both speakers. Excellent speakers. They've been really good.
Jim Norton here. One thought for both speakers. One thing you've both agreed very much the importance of finding the team and getting the right team. One thing I've seen done elsewhere, where I've been a reviewer of MBA projects, is people who've undertaken an MBA simply to put together the team from the other members of the MBA course. And I wonder, is there mileage in that in cooperation with the local business school?
I mean, I've seen that happen a lot around the Oxford area. So the Surrey Business School does seem to get MBA students together for business plans and projects, working with other academics around the university, and then sort of the company spins out, funded by the likes of Oxford Science Innovation, something like that. So yeah, I think it does work well.
Yeah, I was one of those reviewing projects at SIDE and also at London Business School where I've seen this done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a good opportunity, but you need the infrastructure for that. So there's a few universities in the UK that are able to do that, and so that you do need quite a bit of infrastructure, both supporting that collaboration, space for it. How does it sort of grow? And I think it can be an important route as well. But then again, it's also having the mechanisms where you can take your innovations to an MBA group to use that sort of capability within a university as well, which again works in certain universities where you're a bit more, you need quite a mature system for doing some of those types of things. It does work really well with tech because the investment isn't generally too high, is it? So groups can come together and build things quite quickly. Maybe for big engineering innovations, it's not quite as easy, but I think with tech, definitely.
Maybe this is one for Abdul and I to take up in another forum.
Yeah.
Absolutely right, Jim. Do you guys see, I mean, both Alex and David, do you see that this is a trend that is going to continue growing and developing, that is taking academic and scientific innovations into commercial exploitation? Or do you think we're going to go back to the old routine of having to focus just or mainly on publications?
I think that it seems like it's something that's growing, and that I can't imagine that it's going to go back to how it was, focusing on publications. I think there's going to be a lot more people wanting to try and get their inventions and their research out and get it working. So yeah, I think in future, I think that's definitely something that's going to grow. And I think just in general, startups are everywhere are sort of growing, especially in high-tech spaces, as people get closer together with the internet and just as more digital based systems, as David mentioned, for like HR and accounting. I think it just makes all of these things much easier to do than it ever has been before. So I can't imagine it's ever going to be something that is suddenly going to go away.
Yeah, I was thinking about it more from the resource requirements that come with it. It's a costly process for universities. You've mentioned intellectual property, how to protect those and produce patent applications, and then take the proof of concept into the product stage, that translational funding stage. It is costly in terms of people's time and other types of resources, hence my question. But of course, there will be more and more probably policy making initiatives focused on that particular aspect, that is taking scientific and academic innovations into the marketplace through commercial exploitation, spin-outs and licensing. I think, and this is what will push it forward, I'm sure.
I think so, and I think another way of looking at it is if you consider, in some ways, a university is a bit like an investor in a technology, where you've got a lot that you want to put out there. Some of them won't do very much, but some of them will do well enough that then it will pay for itself for the rest of the fund, say. And then that'll help you then generate more the next year. So what you want is more people thinking in this way, so that then in the end, more is being done at the university in the commercialization route. And then hopefully that'll help pay for itself in future. More can be launched and it will build up, rather than seeing it as an issue, just a pure costly issue, I think.
Okay, guys, before we round off, we're coming close to the end of the 1.5 hours session. Before we round off, any final closing remark from either one of you guys, Alex and David, before I open it up again to the floor for the final remarks?
I think
any advice?
Any advice? I think if you want to go and do this, check with the tech transfer office at the university. I think that's always a good way of at least a first case seeing whether you've got anything there, is talk to the people that do this a lot. Just make sure if you're passionate about it, and if you can find the right team, then you can only push these things forward.
I think I'll bounce it back to you, Abdul. Actually, what are your plans for embedding innovation within the institute?
Combination of things, really. We would like to make socio-economic impact, no doubt. It's not purely things that will die in papers that we're after. We've seen that for the last 50, 60 years, people flooding the public domain with lots of scientific innovations that tend to be cited quite often, but never attempt to make its way to market through socio-economic type of impact. This is where I see the Institute should make contributions, really, addressing societal challenges, provide solutions to tough problems that we are facing, not just as a community, but even at global level.
Yeah.
I think this is what we should do.
Yeah, because as a university, we've got the ideas, we've got the team, and we're placed in a good location. But over you know, we're just not quite making that connection, are we, at the moment, like we do in, say, in some other countries where they've got a bit ahead there. But I think the opportunity is definitely there. And I think it's passion and collaboration are the key things. So be prepared to collaborate and you know, do things that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think it's concerted effort, isn't it? It comes from the policymakers, from institutions, academic institutions, but also from academics themselves. It's a paradigm shift, isn't it? To take, you know, make this cultural change from focusing only just on publications to see what the commercial value behind it is first, prior to putting it in the public domain. I think this is the key thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final remark, closing remark from the floor?
Just to thank both David and Alex, I think, for giving their time and their expertise so freely. Thank you. I
second your comment, Jim, very much so. It has been really an exciting session, and no wonder it came right at on the first day of the week-long festival proceedings. It's a very important topic, hence the organisers have really chosen to put it up front. But it has been really splendid. Thanks very much for sharing your successful experiences, both Alex and David. But thanks also to the floor, everybody who's made it. Thanks to you, Jim, for taking the time to be with us. Mind you, there is a treasure that we should be trying to explore together at 3 this afternoon. It's called the AI Treasure Hunt. And I understand winners will have some awards at the end. So try to be there, please, if you can. That's 3 start, okay, this afternoon. And enjoy the rest of the festival and the rest of the day. Thanks very much, everybody.